Wonderful. Welcome everyone to this webinar. We're so glad to have you here. This is a webinar hosted by the advisory group of the Global Strategic Framework on the topic of the SSF Guidelines and the CBD. And before we start, I would like to hand over to Anna to just check on the translation.
Hello, everyone. So maybe use this now on Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen, you will have a little world icon, which you will be able to select either English, Spanish, or French. We do have our first speaker who is going to be speaking in Spanish, so please bear that in mind when moving between different languages. And when we have our breakout rooms, we will make sure that everyone who is French or Spanish speaking and need that interpretation will stay in the main room. Thanks, Anna.
Excellent. And I just like also to recall that please speak slowly so that the interpreters can follow and have time to interpret what you say. Excellent. And I will actually hand over straight away to Nasig Jaffer. And for those of you who don't know him, he is a member of the advisory group of the Global Strategic Framework. And he's currently the coordinator of Masifondesi, which is a community-based organization based in South Africa, but work with small-scale fishing communities across South Africa. And they're active in both coastal and inland fishing communities and have been doing policy advocacy work as a key focus. But more importantly, they are focused on mobilizing communities to self-organize to secure their fishing and livelihood rights across the biodiversity of natural resources in and close to their coastal communities, because this constitutes a human rights in these fishing communities. So with those words, I'd like to hand over to you, Nasig.
Thanks for that. I wasn't actually going to be here because today I'm not in such a good space, health-wise, but it's okay. So I'm not going to be too long, and thanks, Anna, for agreeing to facilitate. I will be here, but if I have to leave early, I'll probably just pop in and out. But let me just say a couple of words. I think obviously, as you've said, the timing of this particular discussion is useful and it is very good as it just precedes CBD. But it's also a critical one in the sense that it is the CBD that comes after the Food System Summit processes with all the complications that bedeviled it. And it also comes, at this point in time globally where COVID-19 is reaching a particular point of either plateauing, but somehow it creates an opportunity to reflect on what the impacts there has been on small-scale fisheries, but critically biodiversity issue challenges currently, and I think it's important that provides the context. So, what are the elements that currently makes it important that in our context of this particular set of discussions, we have had three other themes that informed the previous webinars. Those were themed on human rights and small-scale fishing. It covered gender and women's rights or gender equity and women's rights in small-scale fishing. It covered the kind of main thematic areas that and environment and so on that the guidelines is about, or that makes the guidelines living. But I think there's an important dimension here, and that is that we have attempted to engage environmentalist organizations or organizations who are not rooted in fishery social movements to also contribute and play a role in the implementation of the guidelines. So it is trying to find that space What do environmentalist organizations do? How do they do it? What are the main elements that they have to bear in mind in their work that will then also protect and advance the key provisions in the small-scale fishery guidelines? So it is in that process that I think this conversation has been particularly useful and particularly valuable, and it has a concrete outcome or potential concrete outcome, and that is that the global strategic framework of the guidelines makes allowance for a knowledge sharing platform. In other words, for organizations who are not movement based but who has specific skills and a political interest to play a role in the implementation of the guidelines, be it at regional or continental or local level, to define what that role is. So for the last few sessions that we've had, we have spoken about different thematic areas covered in the guidelines, or we intended to cover. Now I think we need to talk about how do you, as organizations with specialist skills who want to contribute to the process that has already started, how can you do that, and what can you do? So I want to suggest rather that we shift the discussion. Instead of you learning from us, we're hearing from us about what is in the guidelines, that you also share with us what is it that you think you want to do and how do you want to do it, so that, or what are the main driving forces are for you doing that, so that we can then cover the full spectrum of where and how do we move together. So I just wanted to say those few words as what I think is an expectation from me that makes this particular session today different from previous ones. Let me pause there. I think we have an agenda. We have a program. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you so much, Nasig. That was an excellent introduction. And as you said, this last webinar that has been planned in this series of webinars is intended also to listen more into all of you as environmental NGOs and your views on the webinar series so far. And yeah, as Nasig was saying. Excellent. So today the outline will be that we have 2 different speakers, and then we'll have small time for reflection after each, and then we'll have a 10 minutes break, and then we'll come back and have breakout rooms with a few questions that we have prepared. And after that, also some time for reflection on the whole webinar series and what are the main key takeaways that we bring with us from that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hanna Wetterstrand, and I'm working for SwedBio, which is an independent program based at Stockholm Resilience Center, working on biodiversity and equitable development in harmony with nature. And I work with our small-scale fisheries portfolio there, together with Anna Carolina, who is also part of this webinar here today. And I've met some of you before. I'm a qualified facilitator in something called Time to Think, and I will be moderating and facilitating the discussion today. And during this the presentations today, we'd really like you to reflect on your own personal experiences on small-scale fishery and conservation and sustainable use, to keep in mind and sharing experiences with one another. Because this is a very complex and broad issue. So please bear with us. We're all learning and we're here to learn. So really encourage you to share your insights and learnings with one another. And in order to make this as fruitful as possible, we'd like to encourage a few aspects. And the first one is attention. Just being aware of that your listening will actually influence the other speakers and the quality of their thinking. So we really try to be fascinated, interested in one another, And that's how we will set a better environment for also learning from one another. And the second one is equality, just encouraging all of us to respect one another and view each other as equal peers. And then the third one is diversity. We have a very diverse group here today, which is a big advantage, because we can then learn a lot from each other and broaden our perspectives. So to see that as a big benefit of the webinar. And thank you. I see most of you have added your names now onto your affiliation added to your name. That's great. We will use the chat, not during the presentations, but afterwards. We will have dedicated time to use the chat so we can share experiences with one another. But so we don't use it during the presentations to interrupt. And let's see who is here then. I can see we have Kamadeen from Meridian Institute. Hi, great to see you here again. We also have Marina Gomez from WWF. Hi there. And Adrian Arias from Oceans 5. I think I've seen you here before as well. And Hoyt Packham from WCS, great. And Sophie Benbow from Flora and Fauna International. Vivian Solis Rivera from Cope Soledad in Costa Rica, wonderful. And good evening to you, I guess. And then Tom Collinson, Blue Ventures, hi. We've met also before, another meeting. And Annie Tourette from Blue Ventures as well, excellent. And then we have Jones Spartagus, hi, we will present soon from WFFP. Manas from ICSF, hi there in India. And Ravadi from Thailand, wonderful to see you, long time. And Suman from India, ECFWU, I'm not sure what the abbreviation stands for. Would you like to say, if you're there, if you hear me?
Yes, East Coast Fish Workers Union.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
And we also have Chief Gary Harrison from IITC, the International Indie Treaty Council. Great.
Good morning.
Morning. Excellent. And then I'll shift my page here and see if I'm missing someone. Yeah, Patricia Ishingwa from Maisha. Where are you based? Hi. Do you want to say where you're based?
Je suis à l'RDC, en République démocratique du Congo.
The RDC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
And then we have Rocky Sanchez, Hirona from RARE. Good to have you here.
Hey, good afternoon. Good evening.
Good afternoon. Let's see if I'm missing someone. Christiana just disappeared on my screen. I had a name there. If I haven't missed some, Emma McIntosh from Arcadia, funders representative. And Christiana from WFFP. Hi. Wonderful. Have I missed someone now? Please just turn on your mic and introduce yourself. Sylvie here, maybe, Sombine. Or is that an interpreter? No.
Hi, I'm Dipetoro Anita Lokoa from Botswana, representing IPAC and WWF.
Wonderful. Welcome, Anita. And
I am Nimal from NAPSO Sri Lanka.
Wonderful. Great. And Mishomo Madima from Africa.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mishumo Madima, and I am the Secretariat for the African Advisory Group on Small-Scale Fisheries, currently based at Masifundise in Cape Town. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is a huge, broad group. I think this might be the biggest group we've had in this webinar. So it's, I guess, telling for the accuracy of this topic. So just before we start, I'd just like to say briefly that we will practice Chatham House rules, which implies that you're free to use the information that is raised during the meeting. but that neither the identity nor the affiliation of the participants expressing a view may be revealed. So we have agreed to record the two presentations that are coming now, and they will be shared on the IPC website afterwards, so you can share with colleagues. But the discussion as such will not be recorded, and that's for the purpose of everyone feeling free to express their personal opinions and maybe not necessarily the opinions of the organization that you're representing. So hopefully that will make us have a more free, open discussion. And with those words, I'd like to introduce the first speaker of this webinar, which is Saul Vicente Vázquez, who will talk to us about why it's so crucial to integrate the human rights perspective into the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Saul Vicente is a member of the IITC, the board of the International Indian Treaty Council, and he's from Zapoteca, in Oaxaca, Mexico, and the indigenous peoples there. Affiliation through the Unidad de la Fuerza Indígena y Campesina. And he's also a member of the IPC Working Group on Fisheries and a member of the Coordination Committee of the Civil Society Mechanism and Indigenous Peoples for the CW, the Committee on World Food Security. So with those words, I'd like to hand over to you, Saul. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Adiós, Bizanaca. Muchas gracias, hermanas, hermanos. Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Thank you so much. Brothers, sisters, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this important webinar organized by the IPC Fisheries Working Group. So I will not necessarily be speaking about my experience. I would like to tackle these issues through the questions that I have been asked. The very first question put to me was, how can the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, how will it undermine the human rights of people and communities in small-scale fisheries? So to address this question, I would like to provide you first with some context. The Convention on Biological Diversity entered into force in 1993. Then in 2002, the first strategic plan was developed to cover 2002 to 2010. This plan sought a significant reduction of the current rate of biodiversity loss over that period. Now, it goes without saying that expectations are not met, and a new strategic plan was approved for the period from 2010 to 2020 to achieve the 20 Aichi targets. They're called the Aichi targets because these were targets were approved in Japan, but they had a longer-term perspective towards 2050. Again, the Aichi targets were largely unmet. Therefore, a post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is now being sought. The slogan for this is living in harmony with nature for 2050. The strategic plan aims to ensure that by 2050, biodiversity is valued, conserved, and restored, and it is wisely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet, and providing essential benefits for all. And that's what it says textually. Now, the zero draft for negotiation of the post-2020 framework has been drawn up, and a first draft is currently being negotiated by the parties. So by that, I mean by the governments. And this is being done through the working group that was established in 2018. They've also opened up the process to civil society, to indigenous peoples, and to local communities. And in this case, the small-scale fishing organizations and communities, I think, may feel that they are also part of the process. Now, the curious thing about these documents is from the very first strategic plan to the current document of the post-2020 framework, which is being negotiated, a reference to human rights is practically non-existent. However, one of the principles that I would like to highlight is the following, the transformative principle. It says textually that the process will mobilize broad societal engagement to achieve accelerated and sustainable transformations to implement the 3 objectives of the Convention, whereby biodiversity and ecosystems are recognized as the essential infrastructure that support life on Earth, without which human development and well-being will not be possible. So what are the 3 objectives of the Convention? We can see in Article 1 of the Convention that it is defined as follows. No? Okay, and textually it says the objectives of the Convention to be pursued in accordance with its relevant provisions are the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits that arise from the utilization of genetic resources. And it has to take into account all rights over resources and technologies and have appropriate funding. So to be consistent with this provision, therefore, I think that all rights should be taken into account as stated in the Convention. This also must mean human rights. If rights are not taken into account, then the rights of individuals and of communities will be undermined. And in the case of today's seminar, we're talking about the rights of small-scale fishers. Why? Well, in Article 2 of the Convention on Biological Diversity defines in its glossary terms the following: biological diversity. Biological diversity means the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they form part. So this includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. So therefore, in this biodiversity, we're talking about all human creatures and beings, but we also have to include humans. Now, if we look at the Convention again, Article 8, Paragraph J, it states the following: subject to its national legislation, respect, preserve, and maintain knowledge, innovations, and practices of indigenous and local communities, embodying traditional lifestyles relevant for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. It will also promote their wider application with the approval and involvement of the holders of such knowledge, innovations, and practices, and encourage the equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of such knowledge, innovations, and practices. Again, I'm quoting the Convention here. So this is the framework for the application of human rights, which leads us to the next question. Why do we need to reframe the biodiversity debate in relation to people and human rights, and not just conservation and the environment? Well, here, I think it's key that we have to note that the post-2020 biodiversity framework is about implementing the 3 objectives of the Convention. One of these is the sustainable use of its components. And then if we look at the glossary, it defines sustainable use as following. Again, I'm going to quote here: sustainable use means the use of components of biological diversity in a way and at a rate that does not lead to the long-term decline of biological diversity, thereby maintaining its potential to meet the needs and aspirations of present and future generations. So that again was quoting textually. This therefore means that we need to respect the fundamental rights of the generations quoted in the Convention. And then we have the decision passed at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, the decision to develop the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This decision states that they will seek to ensure the coherence and complementarity of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with other existing or upcoming international processes, in particular with regard to consistency and coherence with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So let's now take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals. I'd first like to highlight that SDG 14 states in Target 14C the following: to enhance the conservation and sustainable use of oceans and their resources by implementing international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This convention provides a legal framework for the conservation and sustainable use of oceans and their resources. And then we have indicator 14B1. This states the following: progress by countries in the degree of application of a legal, regulatory, policy, institutional framework which recognizes and protects access rights for small-scale fisheries. So if we take into consideration all of the above, I would like to emphasize this target and this indicator, target 14, noting that the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea states in Article 146 the following: with respect to activities in the area, necessary measures shall be taken to ensure effective protection of human life. So, to this end, the authority shall adopt appropriate rules, regulations, and procedures to supplement existing international law as embodied in the relevant treaties. So, we are making reference here to a fundamental human right, which is the right to life, the human right. But then on the other hand, another factor for achieving SDG 14 would be the voluntary guidelines on small-scale fisheries. These have been adopted as a legal instrument, and the guidelines include among their objectives sustainable use, the prudent and responsible management and conservation of fishery resources in accordance with the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. Therefore, this is a legal instrument that needs to be taken into consideration. We need to do so that we can achieve indicator 14B1, which I've just quoted. Therefore, I would argue that the post-2020 framework has to be closely linked to human rights, particularly the rights of small-scale fishers. Particularly if we take into consideration the IPBES 2009 report, which notes that most of the world's wild and domesticated terrestrial biodiversity is found in areas that have traditionally been managed, owned, used, or occupied by indigenous peoples and local communities. Finally, if we look at the current process of negotiation with the post-2020 framework, we have 4 goals and 21 targets. However, it's still far from taking a human rights-based approach. That's why it's essential, in addition to what I've already said so far, that we take up again the reference that the post-2020 framework negotiation document makes to the 2019 IPBES report. In fact, we can quote from the IPBES report. Paragraph D29 states, the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2050 Vision for Biodiversity cannot be achieved without transformative change. The conditions for this can be put in place right now. In the short term, before 2013, all decision makers could contribute to sustainability transformations. This could include enhanced and improved implementation and enforcement of effective existing policy instruments and regulations. It could also include the reform and removal of harmful existing policies and subsidies. One such measure could be to...
Sayol, could you begin to wrap up, please? Just one more minute.
Okay. So one such instrument could be boosting the human rights regulatory framework. Another could be to eliminate the industrial and mining heavy production policies that have had to high levels of pollution of our oceans and coastal seas. And these oceans and coastal seas are mainly inhabited by indigenous communities and small-scale fishing communities. That's why I believe that your presence in the upcoming discussions of the post-2020 framework on biodiversity will be vitally important. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Saul. Thank you so much. Wonderful, really great presentation covering the whole spectrum of different international laws, agreements, and connecting to the SSF guidelines. I think this gives us a very good base for the continued discussion. Thank you very much. So I'd like actually us to take just 1 minute in quiet to just reflect on what you've heard Saul present. And then I'd like to ask just like 2 or 3 people to share your reflections on this topic. What are your personal thoughts and reflections or experiences in relation to this topic? So I'll just be quiet a minute, and then you can raise your hand if you'd like to share. So let's hear, what's your thoughts and reflections on this topic? Anyone who would like to share something, just raise your hand or wave your hand if you have your cameras on. Anyone who'd like to reflect on this very important topic that was raised? Anita, let's hear what you have to say. Maybe we have to use the French translation.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. Thank you again. The point that I wanted to make a comment on it was the eliminate industrial mining. I thought I would hear more on it because in my country, in Botswana, in the Okavango Delta, our government has signed the agreement with Canadian company to come and drill oil in our Okavango Delta. So this is going to affect our small fishing communities. So I wanted to hear more of the instruments that maybe we can use to help our people on this kind of issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's a very important reflection. I have 2 other people here. I think Vivian was first, maybe.
Muchas gracias, Hannah, y muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and also thank you to Saul for this excellent presentation and for giving us context. I would just like to remind you, he mentioned 2 topics that are very important. One is ensuring that we have the involvement of politicians when it comes to global policies and human rights. And further, he mentioned large-scale industry that exploit and have a knock-on effect on small-scale fishers. Both extremely important. Nevertheless, I want to also say that it's essential to understand that we have interested parties in environmental issues and human rights, but equally we have those who are not understanding the fact that people are going to be affected and displaced if the small-scale fishers are not properly protected and have proper access to sea. So we need to have an integral perspective here, understanding all the different elements as urgent needs for artisanal fishers, so that we don't just look towards falling into the corner of being against abusive cases, but also understanding the fact that small-scale fishers do not have recognized human rights that are actually properly recognized by many stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vivian. Muchas gracias. Let's see, we take one more and then we save some reflections to after Joan's presentation too, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion as well afterwards. Just if I think Ravadi was the next one. If you make it short, we might have time for one more. Sorry, you're on mute, Ravadi.
Thank you very much. I just want to bring to the reality that after the Thai government signed this CBD, and in relation to fishery, it is all good in paper, but then really create a lot of problem to small scale, because right now the government is trying to have marine conservation area and then do not allow fishers to fish. So that is on paper looks good, but in the implementation, there is no measure and guarantee that it would follow what the principle in the document. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then I think we have time also for you, Marina. And I'll save it.
Thank you so much. And I think that in both all the intervention, it is clear that you know, one aspect is the small scale fishers, another aspect is the rest of the practices. So we're talking about, you know, a number targets, but makes sense if it is really framed in integrated marine spatial planning. So really with the objective of having a sustainable management of all the uses at sea, especially the industrial ones. And I think that I will have time later to talk about how is the approach of WWF to the 30 by 30, and you know, the fact that without an engagement of the communities, we are going only to have another top-down, another target over the decision of the people in the field. But again, it is very important to push and to remember and to integrate all the time the discussion on the other 70% of the rest of the planet, or in our case, on the rest of the ocean. And I think this is a message that we should pass.
Thank you so much, Marina. Chief Gary and Christiana, we will come back to you and you can share your reflections after Joan's presentation. Sorry for that, I'll kept your names written down here. So then I'll hand over to Jones, who will share with us a 10 minutes presentation on how the SSF people's traditional knowledge and customary tenure rights have been protecting biodiversity through all of these years. You have met, those of you who have been here before, have met Jones before as well. He's a researcher from Thoothukudi, a coastal town of Tamil Nadu in India. He's presuming his doctoral research thesis titled Fishers' Rights and Encounters with Disasters. And he's an active member in the National Fish Workers Forum in India, and also a youth representative for the WFFP, and as well so for the IPC Fisheries Working Group. Jones, please.
Good evening all. Thank you for this opportunity for presenting about the customary rights, as you said, with regard to the biodiversity. So I thought of sharing with the slide, but I could not. I connected in the mobile because I am in the field. Sorry for that. But I will try to put it very short and sweet. So when we talk about fisher folks or fisher people, it is about three spheres interlinked or interchanged, three spheres. The first sphere is about the natural resources. The natural resources means the sea, the land, shoreland, the forest in the shorelands, and also the water bodies connected to the sea, which is estuarine or brackish water. This is the resources, natural resources. The second thing is that these natural resources are well governed by the fisher folks through their customary governance structure, which has a holistic, like socio-economic, political, ecological, There are norms for each sectors. Cultural norms is there, which the customary governance, which sees these natural resources as a sacred ecology, and it is the sustainable, and it comes with the sustainable or a biodiversity norm, sees as these natural resources as a sacred ecology, in which they and they say that we belong to the resources, not we own the resources. So through the collective governance, so this is the second sphere. The third sphere is that these two spheres, the customary governance as well as the natural resources, both together give them the identity of fisher folk. So this is the sphere of fisher commons. This is their commons, and they belong to the resources. So from this understanding, this is the larger frame that we should see that it is not just a fisher people living on the coast. It is not just it is not just a sea. It is not just the land. It is not just the brackish water. So it has a rich biodiversity, and they have a way of life. To understand this as the way of life, as the post CBDP said that 022 says that living with harmony to the nature. This is how fisher people live with harmony with the nature, these three spheres, and this is their way of life. So they have their customary norms, and they have their natural resources saved, and they see as a sacred ecology, and that gives the identity. So with this frame of understanding of fisher folks, we understand and what is our right. So our right is morely a customary right, a traditional right. In other ways, it is so-called informal right with the nature, because we are connected with the nature and we are living with harmony with the nature. So after this feudal governments or the colonized states or whatever it is, whatever the law has come, the formal laws has come. Formal laws has come with sectorial wise, like forest, land and everything. And it tries to supersede or tries to dilute our customary laws. And it devalued the customary governance. It devalued the customary. It doesn't recognize the fisher folks. It sees the natural resources as their natural capital. So this chain of three spheres should be seen from the today's context of blue economy. So if you see that blue economy sees this natural resources piece as their natural capital, where they have 13 components to implement, so it grabs the resources. So if the national development policies take natural resources as the capital and destroy that, then the chain of customary governance will be broken up, and the identity will be also broken up. So it is a chain of intervention. So one side blue economy, and blue economy in the today's context of post-COVID, initially it was, when we started blue economy tribunals, it was 1.3 trillion valued of these natural resources. Fisher people commons has been valued for 1.5 trillion. Post-COVID, it was 3 trillion. So their agendas were very clear in investing more on the natural resources to gain more and more revenue. The other side, when we talk about environment, people only talk about environment. Most of the people predominantly talks about environment, but they miss the understanding of ecology, of this ocean and coastal ecology, which I say commons. Ecology is a larger word, but every nation states talks about only the environment. Environment is specific or in a particular, it is like an individual, not as a common. It is like a small point around this area talks about environment. So no state talks about ecology. So they can't understand the rich biodiversity. So when the Convention of Biodiversity Forming, which came in India, initially it was after Stockholm Congress, it is marine protected areas, which came to the fisher folks. Marine protected areas, reserved forest, whatever reserved forest, and then they talked about conservation sites. When the marine protected area comes in, I'm talking with the experience of India. When they talk about a marine protected area, the entire fisher commons goes to the forest department or the forest ministry in India. Forest ministry is totally different, and they become the land law of the shorelands, land law of the natural resources, fisher commons, forest department. So forest who want to safeguard the environment, see fishermen as the threat. They understand the formal laws of Wildlife Protection Act, Conservation Act, and other acts in India, but they can't understand the customary law. They can understand that they cannot not understand the customary governance. Rather, they blame these fishermen as the encroachers or the looters to the environment or the marine protected area, and they are denied the access. Then comes after that 1922 the convention came, India came up with the Act of Biodiversity Act, and then it comes with the recently it came with this target of Aichi target. If my pronunciation will be wrong, it is Aichi target, AACH target. In this Aichi target, they talk about 10% of the marine conservation sites. They talk about 10% of, in India, it is 106 marine conservation sites, which means more and more coastal lands or the natural resources are transacted, are being taken control by the forest department. Which means in India, in one district of India, or one province, whatever in India, like Tamil Nadu where I belongs, it is 1,076 kilometers coastline. Out of this, nearly 600 kilometers of coastline is under forest department, and other 200 kilometers of coastline is under the port limits of blue economy policy. The coastline stretch, kilometer-wise stretch. So this is how the land conversions has been happened. And this comes under the land department. And the past 2 months, we are working to document the records of the forest department to say that this much land you have and you have declared, because we can't even put an approach road for 2 streets in a coastal village because it comes under forest department. It talks about the target of Aichi. It talks about the target of conservation. It talks about the conservation principles. In specific Gulf of Mar, and the other thing is that what here we have to highlight is that these natural resources or the fisher commons are largely in the shorelands or the estuaries are largely used by the women, fisher women. They predominantly use the fisher commons. They sustain the fisher commons and they save it rather than the men in the fisher folks. But this forest department gives so many tortures or so many, there are many women violations, fisher women violations, which can be dealt out. There are many harassments. There are many harassments when they enter into a mangrove forest, which is called conservation site. There are many harassments. We are recording all these violations now. The past 2 months I have been here. Their housestead has been, and women have been coming out with many narratives of how forest officials in the name of conservation is harassed them. So this is how. Then in the same Aichi target 18 clearly says that by 2020, understand the customary use, understand the customary governance, and recognize them and come with the national law, incorporate with the national law, so that it will not disrupt the harmony of the people like fisher folk in the commons. Still date, they're talking about 2022. Still date, I think in many coastal developing nations, this target is not achieved because it is not achieved or our customary laws are not been, customary governance has not been recognized still yet. So this is how I see that the failure of the Aichi target. By 2022, we should have our customary governance has been recorded. Then where is my right? So my right is being taught from the VGSF principles. VGSF principles clearly says for 5.4 and others. Yeah, 5.4 and others. Yeah.
We go for one more minute.
Which clearly talks about customary rights, which clearly talks about our rights. But which syncs with also the convention Aichi target 18 and the VGSF target also talks about customary rights. But still date, no state has come with the recognition of SSF or the fisher people, because VGSF is global in scope, but implementation is grassroots and the national level. So this is how, so one side VGSF, one side Convention of Biodiversity, and the other side is the entire entire grab of resources through blue economy policy. So how does this sync? And these all are coming from the state involvement and through the global interlinked chains that has been. So here I want to highlight the final this thing is that if you disaggregate this chain or decline the resources or disturb this biodiversity, there will be also decline in the fisher folks, in the fisher people in the coastal. So this will decline the communities. The IPC reports from 2014 to yesterday's report, last week's report, says that low-lying areas will be affected by climate change. It will be disappear. That is also should be taken into consideration. So it is very clear, very evidence that if the resource dies, fisher folk will die. If the resource declines, there will be no fisher folk will disappear. So I request that to the civil societies and the aligned groups from WFFP and from the NFF National Fisher Forum in India, we says that we need a national legislation to protect, to recognize our rights, to recognize our customary rights, because it is in the conventions of all the international conventions. But that is how I request here for the environmental NGOs and other civil societies to push for each nations to recognize our rights, recognize our customary rights, and come up with the national law to protect the rights of the fisher folks. So thank you for all. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jones. Let's take just, really rich, wonderful presentations coming into the concreteness of some of the consequences of some of these conservation international laws and your interpretation of how that influences. Very rich. Thank you so much. Let's take just 30 seconds time for reflection, and then I will open up the floor again. And Chief Gary and Christina, if you still want to do your reflections, I'll give you the word first, but then please raise your hands again so I see.
Yeah, I just wanted to make mention that right now, with the war going on between up there in Russia and the Ukraine, is going to present problems for not only the small scale fisheries, but biodiversity and food security, because many people may or may not know, but the Ukraine is a breadbasket for Europe. There's a lot of food that is shipped out of there. The small scale fisheries people are not, have no longer access to the water, so they cannot fish. So this is also going to present big problems in many areas when it comes to, now they're going to want to drill for oil in a lot of these sensitive areas that have a lot of biodiversity. So I think we need to think about some of that going on and how all of us are going to be able to handle the new stresses on our fishing and food resources and the biodiversity that is in our areas, because it's going to affect it all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing up that very, sad development that's happening right now also into the picture. Thank you, Gary. Do we have someone else who would like to?
Yes.
Christiana.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for giving me the floor. I would also first like to commend Saulo and Jones for their wonderful presentations. And I particularly am having a lot of interest on Article 8J, because this is where especially the indigenous people's interests are addressed, or also local communities. And I just wanted to stress the fact that as small-scale fishers, we have been lamenting for long, because as beautiful as the policies are created at the global level, when it comes to the grassroots or front lines, these ones are not felt. And the governments, some implement partly, some don't implement at all. For instance, I also would like to refer to the issue of equitable sharing of resources benefits, because what we have experienced in Northern Kenya is the fact that we have corporations which have set house in our area doing mega wind power projects, and their maps include the waters, the lake. And the first one that took off is Lake Turkana Wind Power Project that is owned by private people from Denmark, or a private company from Denmark. And we have seen that although the project took off and power has been taken away to the national grid of Kenya, northern Kenyans or Royangalani people are left without electricity. And then there are the benefits accrued from such mega projects that don't reach the small-scale fishers and other local communities around the lake. Because you find that since the project came, the people are more impoverished than they were before the project. And the money goes elsewhere. And it's not impacting on the small-scale fishers. Therefore, I would really like us to, and there is also the issue of customary law. According to our experience, national law and customary law in our case conflict. Our customary law has protected the water resource and the land around it for years and years and years. But you find that our laws, our country laws, encourage Kenyans to go anywhere in the country and do whatever business you want to do. So you see, there are many people who have moved into the fishers' lands who are not traditionally fishers, just coming to make money and fishing with this total disregard. One goal is making money. And then you find a very rich lake like Lake Turkana with a lot of species and harvest before has come, the harvest has really gone down. We just catch some very, very small fishes, which was a taboo in the Molo culture to be consumed. And this is because of the influx that is allowed by the national law. And therefore, they have squeezed the small-scale fisher community into a corner, and these other people with the license, big licenses and whatever are doing their business. Therefore, the customary law must be protected because it not only protects the human beings, it also protects our natural resources. It protects nature. It protects our environment. Therefore, that is one area that I would really like this group to have a look into, because this is what is making us, just as Jones has said, without these resources, without the waters, we are dead, we are finished. And let us not help the laws or the policies from above and national finish our people at the grassroots. Thank you very much, Anna, for giving me space again.
Thank you so much, Christiana, for that very rich examples and clarifying the importance of customary rights and sustainable use. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to hand over also to Annie from Blue Ventures before we take a shorter break than I had anticipated, but a 5 minutes break we'll have after Annie.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you to everybody for their intervention. That's very interesting and very much in line with what we have been thinking about at Blue Ventures about 30 by 30 and this new framework. And I was wondering if you had any specific policy change goals that you want to see happen in the post-2020 framework that will be discussed in Geneva in a week. At Blue Ventures, we're trying to push for the recognition of tenure rights of indigenous people and local community in the Target 3, as well as other few points. But I was wondering what you thought about it and if anybody has specific policy change goals that they want to have. Finally, what we are calling for is in an open letter that I can link in the chat later in case of interest. But yeah, just wondering if you have any plans on that. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. That's an important question, Annie. So let's you can use your it's okay if you use the break to add things as a response to Annie's question, or bring it up in the breakout rooms that will happen after. Sorry, Manas, but we'll have to cut there, and you can bring your reflection to the breakout rooms. So let's take 5 minutes break. So we come back 10 past. It's on my computer. It's now exactly 5 minutes. So let's see each other in 5 minutes. And please don't leave, but come back. I'll put on some music here in the meantime.